In the previous video we saw how to make a simple graph. Now let's add some more graph panes. I'll take the cooling tower speed and drop that into the chart, but the scales don't quite match. So what if I wanted to use a separate y-axis for the speed? That's very easy to do. I'll click in the overall graph window. Up comes the chart. By the way, I will change that to cooling tower. And then there's a y-axis collection up here. I can click on that, and it's a collection because there are multiple y-axes in each chart. The primary axis is the default, which is already defined, but I'm going to make a new one. And for the time being, I'll do nothing other than simply add the axis and leave all the options alone. That's all you have to do. When I come down here and select the speed, which I want on a different axis, I'll scroll down here and say the axis that's defined for this is not the primary, but axis 1. As soon as I do that, I'll see a separate y-axis appear. It's automatically titled cooling tower 100 speed because that's the only channel in that at the moment. If I wanted to make that y-axis appear on the other side of the graph, I can simply go to that collection again, select y-axis 1 and say is it near or far, and so the position is toggled to far, and now it appears on this side. You can have as many y-axes left and right as you wish, and they're configurable as well in that if I look at the name of the y-axis, I can describe it as fan speed. Let's call it fan speed. I can change the color of the labels. When I use a single channel in the axis, the labels by default take the color of that channel, so green in this case, but I can change that. So if I want them to be maroon, for example, I can do that, and now the labels have changed to maroon. And of course I can change any number of other properties such as scaling and axis titles and what have you. Let's say I wanted to put this into a different pane so that even though I have now selected a different axis, I'm still not quite happy with the way that this looks. I can click in the graph and down here make a new set of panes. There's a collection of panes as well as a collection of axes. And just as I did before with the axes, I'm initially going to simply select a new pane, leave everything as default and say yes. And we can see there's a top pane now and a bottom pane. I'm going to move the cooling tower speed to the bottom pane. I'll let the axis default and I'll move it to the bottom pane. So now I have two panes. The axis is now defaulted to the left as it was previously. If I have several panes and several sets of y-axes, so I could, for instance, put in a start-stop signal in addition to the cooling tower speed and move that to the bottom pane as well, then I might want that on a separate axis again. So what I'm going to do in this case is to go to the panes collection, click in the overall chart window, look at the panes collection, and within the panes collection I now have another y-axis collection. So this is the set of y-axes for the bottom pane. I'm going to add another y-axis and default that, and then move the start-stop signal to axis 1. And now I can see a slightly different signal on here. I can also move that axis to the left. So clicking in the panes collection and looking at the axes, I'm going to say move that far. And I'm going to leave the other parameters alone for now, but of course I could once again change colors, scaling, callouts, and so on. And now the scale on the other side. In general, I can have as many panes and as many axes as I want, and the number of panes that we actually choose is usually limited just by the screen size and the screen resolution, so we can get a decent picture. But it's a very useful feature for things like elaborate chiller plants where I have multiple chillers, multiple pumps, and I can map out status points below each other and then scroll through them with the arrow keys like we did before to do some troubleshooting. Very useful feature. So as a last item here, let's see what happens if I change the scaling in the bottom pane from automatic to manual so that I can separate these two graphs a little bit. I'm going to go over to the panes, choose the bottom pane from that collection, so pane 1, and look at the y-axis. They defaulted to automatic scaling. I'm going to change that to manual. So I'm looking at the primary axis, which is the green cooling tower speed at the moment. I'm going to say from true, this is false. Now I'm going to manually scale it. And I'm going to enter a maximum of 120. You can see the graph updates immediately as I type these values. And so now that I've chosen 120, this is 0 to 60 hertz. So I've basically, by limiting it to the 60 hertz value but changing the axis scale to 120, moved that to the bottom half of that pane. And I'm going to take axis number 1, which is the right hand axis, and also change it to manual. So auto scale is false. That's a 0 to 1 signal. I'm going to make that a -1 to 1 signal, and that moves it to the top half of that pane. I'm going to say OK. And so now within that one pane, I've separated those two signals by manually scaling the axes.